Welcome to Reddit Stories. I'm Mr. Redder. In today's story, an entitled Karen gets exactly what she deserves after trying to use her coworker as her personal Uber. Let's dive in. Karen coworker thought I was her free Uber, so I let her pay for one instead. I work in an office with a bunch of people, and for the most part, everyone gets along fine. That said, there's one coworker, Lisa, who has a way of getting under my skin. She's the type of person who always expects special treatment and acts like the world owes her something. She's loud, entitled, and never hesitates to complain about anything that doesn't go exactly the way she wants it to. A few weeks ago, Lisa's car broke down and she started asking people for rides. Since she lives near me, I figured I'd help her out. Uh-oh. It wasn't a big deal at first. I gave her a ride to work a couple of times and she seemed grateful for it. Then she started asking for more. First it was a stop at the grocery store, then she needed to swing by the pharmacy, then she wanted to pick up coffee on the way in. It was getting to the point where every trip turned into an errand run for her. I tried to be nice about it. I wasn't in a rush most days, and I figured she was probably stressed about not having a car. But then I overheard her talking to another coworker at lunch, laughing about how I was her personal chauffeur, and how she was in no hurry to get her car fixed now that she had a free ride whenever she wanted. That ticked me off. That same day, she asked if I could drive her home. I told her no, and I brought up what I had overheard. She just rolled her eyes and said I was taking it too seriously and that it was just a joke. I told her I didn't think it was funny and I wasn't interested in being used like a free Uber. She got huffy and stormed off, and later I saw her standing outside the building, complaining on the phone. I assumed that she was ordering an Uber or begging someone else for a ride. Lisa didn't take the rejection well. The next morning, she came in with an attitude. She made some passive-aggressive comments within earshot about how some people are too sensitive and good luck ever getting anything from me. That was hilarious, considering she never did favors for anyone. She also told some of our coworkers that I left her stranded, which was complete nonsense. We work in an area where ride shares and public transportation is everywhere. She had options, she just didn't want to pay for them. A few coworkers asked me about it, and I just told them the truth. Some of them laughed, saying that Lisa was always like this. One of the guys said she pulled a similar stunt a few months back with another coworker, but played the victim when she got called out. Later that day, she sent me a message asking if I could just be the bigger person and give her a ride for the rest of the week. I ignored her. Lisa could not take the hint. She tried to corner me after a meeting, acting all sweet, saying she didn't mean anything by it, and that she really needed a favor for just a few more days. I told her no again, and I reminded her that I wasn't a free taxi. That's when the mask slipped. She went from sugary sweet to straight up nasty, saying, "Wow, I guess chivalry is dead. And I thought you were a nice guy, but I see your true colors now." I told her I wasn't interested in playing games, and I walked away. I thought that was the end of it. Nope. She started throwing little digs my way in group conversations, making snide comments like, "Well, I wouldn't know. I don't have a car." Or, "Must be nice to have friends who actually help you out." No one took her side though. In fact, a few people told her to drop it. Then she tried one last move, going to our manager, which thankfully he got a kick out of because he knows how she is. Update. Lisa actually tried to report me to HR. I kid you not. She went in and told them that I was creating a hostile work environment by refusing to help her when she was in need. HR called me in and I explained the situation. The guy barely held back a laugh. He told me I was under no obligation to give rides to anyone and that Lisa's complaint was ridiculous. He assured me I had nothing to worry about and that if she kept harassing me, I should let them know. That must have been the last straw for Lisa because she completely ignored me after that. No more snide remarks, no more fake sweet talk, nothing. A week later, her car was somehow magically fixed. Some people will take a mile if you give them an inch. I don't regret helping her out at first, but I definitely learned my lesson about being too generous with entitled people. Never again. Wow, I went through almost the exact same situation with my cousin. A few years ago, he lost his car in an accident and asked if I could drive him to work while he figured things out. I didn't mind at first, since his job was only about 10 minutes out of my way, but after a couple of weeks, I started noticing how much gas I was burning through. I wasn't expecting a full tank every time, but a little contribution would have been nice. So I brought it up one day and just casually said, "Hey, could you chip in for some gas? Even just a few bucks now and then?" You would have thought I insulted his entire bloodline. He got all huffy saying, Wow, I thought family helped each other, and I guess now I know where we stand. Mind you, this was the same cousin who wouldn't even spot me $5 for coffee when I forgot my wallet once. After that, I told him he needed to start finding another way to get to work. He tried to guilt trip me, but I stood my ground. Funny enough, the next week, he had money for Uber. Some people just love free rides. Literally. Have you ever had someone try to use you for free rides? If so, what would you do about it?
I know how I would have kept her out of my car. Let's just say I would be eating a lot of beans the night before.
Petty mother-in-law refuses to take off her shoes in our home, but I got the last laugh. I'm 20 female and my boyfriend is 24 male. We've been together for almost 2 years and we live together. His mother is very involved in his life, some might say overbearing, but I try to be respectful. She's nice, but has a way of pushing boundaries while acting like she means well. The issue is this. I have a no shoes in the house rule. My boyfriend is fine with it. All my friends do it without a problem, but his mom refuses. She claims it's rude to ask guests to take off their shoes and that it makes her feel disrespected. I've tried explaining that it's just a cleanliness thing, but she won't budge. Last weekend, she came over and, as expected, walked in with her shoes on. I very politely asked, "Oh, can you take them off, please?" She huffed and said,
"You're really gonna make me do this?"
I just stood there waiting. She sighed dramatically, took them off, and then spent the entire visit sulking like a child. A few hours later, I got a text from my boyfriend's dad saying I made her cry and that she feels like I'm trying to assert dominance over her in her son's life. My boyfriend was on my side, but now his parents are acting like I've disrespected royalty. His mom has now taken this whole thing to another level. Apparently, she's been telling family members that I'm controlling and that I'm trying to push her out of her son's life. My boyfriend's aunt even reached out, saying I should just let this go because she's just set in her ways. Meanwhile, my boyfriend actually called her out on her nonsense. He told her that she's always welcome in our home, but she needs to respect how we choose to keep it clean. She went on a whole rant about how she never thought her own son would turn against her over something as silly as shoes. He reminded her that we have rules in our home and it's not personal, but she just doesn't want to hear it. A few days later, she doubled down and started making snide comments about how she was raised to believe that good hosts don't force guests to take off their shoes at the door. It was ridiculous. She even made a passive-aggressive Facebook post about how some people need to lighten up about traditions. Of course, some of her relatives chimed in, and a few of them even messaged my boyfriend about what was going on. We invited his parents over again for dinner to try and smooth things over. She showed up in some ridiculous slip-on shoe covers, like the ones you see in hospitals. I kid you not, she made direct eye contact with me while slowly sliding them over her shoes. My boyfriend burst out laughing, and I couldn't even be mad. It was so petty and dramatic. She sat down and acted like nothing happened, just chatting away with his dad like she wasn't making a scene. Eventually, my boyfriend jokingly asked if she wanted to take her shoes off under the covers, and she snapped back with,
"This is my compromise."
His dad looked exhausted, and I just let it go because, at this point, what else can you do? As dinner went on, she kept making exaggerated movements, like stretching her legs out and tapping the floor with her covered feet like she was proving a point. At one point, she even sighed loudly and said, "I hope I don't trip on these," as if she was being forced into some horrible, uncomfortable situation. It was honestly embarrassing, but I ignored it. The dinner was awkward, but she did keep the covers on the whole time. At least there was no dirt tracked into the house, so I guess I won. Final update. A few weeks passed, and I honestly thought she'd let it go. Then my boyfriend got a call from her saying she had bought a pair of house shoes that she will now wear whenever she visits. She made a huge deal about how she is meeting me halfway, acting like she had just done something groundbreaking. I don't know if I should be annoyed or just relieved that she's finally stopped arguing. She proudly sent a picture of them to my boyfriend, a pair of bright pink slippers with rhinestones. I guess she expected me to say something about it, but I just told my boyfriend, cool, as long as she sticks to wearing them inside. When she visited again, she paraded around the house in her new compromise shoes like she was making some huge sacrifice. She even made a comment about how not all of us like walking around barefoot like savages. I just smiled and nodded. If this is what it takes to keep the peace, fine. At the end of the day, I'm just glad my boyfriend stood his ground with me. His mom still throws little passive-aggressive comments about how, in her day, guests were treated with respect, but at least she's not outright fighting us on this anymore. Some battles you win, some you just survive. I guess this was both. Nightmare roommate made my life horrible, so I got the ultimate revenge. This happened almost 22 years ago. I had joined the Army and was in my second phase of training for my job, known as AIT. It's where you go after basic training, and while it's more laid back, there are still drill sergeants around. They're far more chill than the ones at basic though. Anyway, there's a system of gaining more privileges, and because I couldn't take a PT test while my leg was injured and recovering, I was stuck at an early phase for too long. I was in a room with another Phase 4 Ranger, and we got along great. Then a brand new kid, straight out of basic, got assigned to our room with us. We were much further along in our training, so our schedules didn't match up with this new guy. The guy was the biggest, dumbest, ugliest, laziest jerk imaginable, and he thought he was the smartest person in any room. Every night at lights out, he'd blast 50 Cent on his headphones, so loud that I couldn't even hear my own music on mine. Every morning when he had early duty, he'd never get up, and a drill sergeant would beat down our door to fetch him. He made unbelievable messes in the room, and every single day we'd get in trouble, because while my roommate and I were in class, this guy would come in from whatever casual duty he was on and trash everything. We had extra duty every weekend for failing room inspections because of him. I have no idea how, but this idiot got boot polish on the bathroom mirror. He'd grab our stuff, toss it in his wall locker out of pure carelessness, and insist he didn't have it. The one and only time he helped clean was when he emptied the garbage can. Once. And he acted like he had built the pyramids for us, going on and on about how helpful he was. When he wasn't doing all of that, he was picking arguments and bragging about what a genius he was. We despised him. We asked to have him moved, but the drill sergeants wouldn't do it. We genuinely couldn't stand this guy. Every single day, we'd tell him exactly what a worthless jerk he was. Eventually, he came off casual status and got into class. One of the earliest parts of that class was land navigation, and land nav day meant being out there early. That presented me with an opportunity I had been waiting for. One of those days when he left a giant mess, he also left his wall locker unsecured. I looked inside, and sure enough, there was something useful. The combination to the padlock he used on his wall locker. Even better, everyone used the same model and color of cheap master lock from the PX across the street, since it was the only option available. So I swapped my lock out with his and left for training. When I got back, he was already there, and he had been for a couple of hours. It was Arizona in July, and he had been scrambling all over the land navigation course in the sun. When he got back to the barracks, all he wanted was a shower and a change, but he was locked out of his stuff. He was distraught, pacing, sweating, and mumbling about what to do. I pretended to be helpful and tried to get it open, but to no luck. I told him he'd have to get a drill sergeant to cut it off, so off he went. While he was gone, I switched the locks back and kicked back on my bed. When he came back with the drill sergeant, his face was red, and I was told later that he had been crying in front of everyone. I sat there looking suspiciously innocent while the drill sergeant smirked at me. She wasn't stupid. She knew exactly what had happened. So she said, "Okay, before I cut your lock off, I'm gonna try the combo just to be sure. What is it?" He rattled it off, and she opened the lock immediately. My roommate and I lost it. His head just dropped, and he cried some more. He couldn't believe it. He felt completely defeated, humiliated, and worthless. This guy was so high-strung and narcissistic that this tiny prank absolutely crushed him. It was beautiful. They moved him out the next day into someone else's room. That guy was fed up with him within 24 hours. I felt bad for him, but at least that idiot was finally out of my hair, and I got to see him cry. I never told him I did it, but I told some others, and they loved it since they all hated his guts too. A couple of weeks later, I graduated and went on to my next station. He did not follow. He was supposed to, but needs of the Army did him out of his specialized training, so he got sent straight into the meat grinder. I never saw him again, and that's all that mattered. I still take more satisfaction in this than even I can believe. Sometimes you get a chance for revenge, and it turns out better than you ever imagined. Edit to add, I had my wife and kid living off post, and getting duty every weekend because of this guy seriously cut into my family time. I missed my son's first birthday because of him. I appealed to a drill sergeant, and she cut me some slack since she knew it wasn't my fault. But yeah, I absolutely loathed this guy. The fact that I got the last laugh still makes me smile. Do you have any crazy AIT or tech school stories of your own? If so, we'd love to hear about it. The manager who loved rules until they backfired. In 2021, I was working on a project with this manager called Mark, who was a real stickler for the rules. He was the kind of guy who wouldn't allow chit-chat in his team and loved an office day more than anything. despite the fact that our team was external and all of us lived crazy far away. I've got a chronic disease which, at the time, was kept relatively under control with infusions at the hospital every few weeks. Since Mark didn't want to chit-chat, he wasn't aware that I live with this disease. One day, I was in the hospital working from my bed with a cannula in one arm. We had our daily meeting planned, and I figured it would be fine to call in without my camera, as they could still hear me just fine. I also didn't want to freak anyone out with the infusion line in the picture. I get onto the call, and Mark immediately comments that he can't see my face. I tell him that I don't have my camera on today, and I don't elaborate, figuring that it's a 15-minute call and I could just as easily be driving or something. Mark responds by asking me to stay back on the call after we finish. I comply, and he chews me out for not turning on my camera, saying that it's a rule that we all need to show our faces. Fine. I turn on my camera and watch his face go from red to white as he sees me in what is very clearly a hospital room. He looks stunned, completely at a loss for words. I tell him I'm uncomfortable being on camera while I'm getting treatment. I still don't elaborate on what it's for, just watching him squirm in awkward silence. Mark stammers out something about how he didn't know and that maybe an exception could be made. I just stare at him, letting the weight of his own ridiculous rule sink in. He quickly ends the call and I go back to finishing my work, grinning to myself. A few days later, one of my teammates tells me Mark has been a lot quieter in meetings, barely enforcing his camera rule anymore. Word must have spread, and I can only imagine the embarrassment he felt after that moment. I never brought it up again, but I could tell he avoided making eye contact with me in future calls. That moment still brings joy whenever I get a manager who loves rules just a little too much. Some people only learn their lesson when they embarrass themselves, and Mark was no exception. A few weeks later, I noticed something funny. Mark, who used to be obsessed with cameras being on, started keeping his own camera off in meetings. The same guy who would lecture people about engagement and team culture now suddenly had excuses. One day, someone asked why his camera was off, and he mumbled something about connection issues. It was priceless. Even better, I started getting messages from coworkers telling me that they were inspired to push back on stupid rules too. One guy refused to stay late for unnecessary meetings. Another pushed back on pointless reports. It was like my little moment of rebellion had started a quiet revolution in the team. People realized they didn't have to follow arbitrary rules just because someone in charge said so. Eventually, Mark stopped enforcing the camera rule altogether. It was never officially announced, but everyone noticed. Meetings became a lot more relaxed, and the team was actually more productive without the constant micromanaging. Months later, I ran into a coworker at a company event who had transferred to another team. He told me that Mark had developed a reputation for being the guy who got put in his place on camera, and that other managers had subtly distanced themselves from his style of leadership. That moment, small as it seemed at the time, changed everything. Mark learned a valuable lesson, and so did everyone else. Sometimes the best way to deal with control freaks is to let them embarrass themselves. And honestly, I'd do it all over again just to see that look on his face. Entitled customer tries to return a 12-year-old stove, loses it when we say no. So I work at a call center for a certain members-only bulk store chain, specifically in the online branch. One of the perks we offer our customers is an almost comically lenient return policy. We started limiting certain electronics to 90 days from the date of delivery back in 2016, and our returns team needs to look over and approve any returns for orders over 2 years old. But by and large, we accept almost anything. I like this policy. It's a lot easier for me to just process a return than it is to argue with the customer for 20 minutes about how, no sir, it's not our fault that you didn't think to open the box until well after 90 days and now the computer doesn't work. I can get you over to warranty, but beyond that, my hands are tied. The customers like this policy because it means they can basically return stuff whenever they want within reason. Returns usually approve the 2+ year requests unless it's something egregiously dumb. The key word there is within reason. It's early into my shift. I don't think I'd even had my first break yet. Phones are dead at this time of the day, as is typical once the holiday order rush and the post-holiday return rush subside. I'm sitting there trying to figure out what 71 down on my crossword puzzle is when a call comes through. I snap to attention, give my spiel, and ask what this guy needs. Nobody came to pick up the stove I'm returning. They delivered the new one and took the gas range, but I still have an electric one to return. Well, I'm sorry to hear that, sir. I'd be happy to see what's going on. I check the logistics scheduler. The only return this guy has is for the one that got picked up. I ask if he has the order number for the item being returned. He does not. I pull up his order history and I ask him when he ordered the item. For context, the order history we see on our end only goes back to about 2017. I think August of 2013. So it's gonna be one of those calls. I'm not looking forward to having to dig through our old system to find this guy's order, but at this point, I'm figuring he just had an old phone number on the order, and that's why his pickup isn't on our schedule with the rest of his orders. After about 20 minutes of checking every single membership number on file in our system, the guy claimed that he had never changed his membership number. He was wrong. And multiple assertions of, the last people just pulled it right up. No, they didn't. I finally find the order. The return was canceled because our returns team didn't think refunding a 12-year-old stove because it stopped working was in the spirit of our return policy. Judging by our records, the stove had worked just fine for 12 years, which makes it highly unlikely that any defect was the cause of the issue. And honestly, 12 years is a solid lifespan for a home appliance these days. It's also way out of any warranty we have. I explain this to the customer as gingerly as I can, and he demands to know why we didn't tell him this years ago. I'm grandfathered into your 90-day policy, aren't I? When did that change? Why didn't you tell me years ago that you weren't going to accept my return anymore? I need to escalate this right now. I try to explain to him that these sorts of situations are handled on a case-by-case basis, and it's less about a hard limit and more about the fact that a 12-year-old appliance starting to have issues can't really be considered a manufacturer defect that we are obligated to refund. He's not having it and asks for a supervisor. You got it, sir. I kick him over to my supervisor, who also tells him, a stove not working after 12 years isn't really something we can blame on the manufacturer. It's not like we sold you a lemon. While transferring the call, I hear him mutter, if I had known you wouldn't accept my return now, I would have returned this years ago. So he just admitted he wanted us to pay him to haul away his junk instead of actually believing it was defective. I really do love how people assume they can just game the system and get away with it. About an hour later, I check back with my supervisor, who tells me the guy argued for another 10 minutes before finally accepting defeat and hanging up. We both have a good laugh about it. Honestly, the audacity some people have never fails to amaze me. I'd feel bad if it was actually a case of a real defect, but after 12 years, come on, man. Some people really don't know when to quit. My super rich friend insults us on her wealth-building podcast and tells her listeners to stay away from average people. My bestie since childhood, let's call her Jenny, has her finances secured. She, who's 35 years old, built and made an exit from a business making her insanely rich. She comes from a very humble background, and I can confidently say that she has earned it by working for it. I come from a pretty average background, and I have a pretty average job today. So do most of our friends. I don't miss anything, and I do have savings. I can go on trips, etc. Her story is a fairy tale, and we're all super proud of her. But a couple of years ago, she was approached by an agency that pushed her to become a public motivational speaker and a podcaster. Since then, she has become increasingly unbearable to be around, and I eventually came to the point where I needed to tell her. Since Jenny got rich, she has always been herself, just in a more fancy package, and I've loved that for her. You go, girl. She has always been super respectful about other people's finances, and when we meet up, she's always up for whatever the rest of us can afford. Even on her bachelorette party, she made a deal about making sure to do things everyone could afford. When pursuing her journey as a motivational speaker and a podcaster, I had to revisit everything I thought about her. All of her motivational tips were related to not wanting to be an average person, and that anyone can become just as rich as her if they weren't lazy. In one episode, she talks about making sure to surround oneself with successful people to avoid looking at average people as an acceptable norm. She even went as far as describing another friend's husband as her nightmare partner, as he lacks ambition. She didn't mention him by name, but other details that made us able to identify him. Over time, this worsened, and eventually other people stopped inviting her to things. Now the podcast took another turn, and she started to talk about how to handle when people turn their back on you for becoming successful, and how lonely it is at the top. I decided it was time to tell her that I think she's losing grip of reality, and that if she continues with being so judgmental in her podcast, she will end up just as lonely as she describes herself to be. Jenny got super upset with me and told me she wouldn't expect this from her best friend, and claims I've been jealous and felt inferior to her my whole life, which is absolutely not true. She tells me the whole podcast thing is her playing a part, and that she exaggerates her opinions for reach. She thinks I'm the one who has convinced all the others to leave her side and wants me to apologize before ever speaking to me again. Help me here. Am I the jerk? Should I apologize? Not the jerk. She's not lonely because she's at the top. She's lonely because she has lost all touch with humanity. Not the jerk. She sounds insufferable. I know several people who are wealthy enough to never have to work again for a single day in their lives, but they also happen to be some of the most humble people I know. Jenny seems like one of those main character syndrome folks who made it to the top of the mountain, so to speak, and now has to yell at the top of her lungs to let everyone know. The problem is that in this metaphor, she is also rolling boulders down that hill that affect the lives of those people who are still striving to better themselves. Consider not apologizing to her. She's better off learning that her behavior will alienate the friend she had. It looks like she was able to keep herself humble until she got in touch with these people who thought they could make money through her and fed her with crap about how she is inherently better than everyone else because she has money, which is not hard to do when society has been drip-fed this for the last 50 years at least. Now she's finding out, but she's internalized so much of this crap that instead of, "Oh my goodness, I'm antagonizing everyone in my life," she just goes to, "It's lonely at the top." Not the jerk. Maybe Jenny needs a reminder that money can't buy everything. If the podcast is costing her all of her friends, she's paying a very high price indeed. If she's willing to trade actual, real friends for likes, she's reaping what she has sown. No jerks here. What you and your friends are missing here is that her target audience is people who are on the same journey she has been on, business owners and entrepreneurs who are determined to build tremendous wealth. There's nothing wrong with being average, but please understand that average was not what she wanted to be, nor what her listeners desire to be. She achieved her goal, and now she's helping others do the same. Just because she's your friend does not mean you need to be listening to her podcast, especially if it's going to upset you. If Michael Jordan did a podcast helping basketball players who were on the road to the NBA, he wouldn't tell them to surround themselves with average players who don't take the game seriously. What your friend is saying has been said by countless other speakers because there is a certain level of truth to it. And most importantly, if she truly believes in surrounding herself with above average people, then she in fact sees you as above average. You don't have to be wealthy to be an above average person. How we treat others is what determines who we are, not our net worth. Well, who do you think is the jerk? OP or her friend? Please let us know.
I prefer to surround myself with below average people. Why do you think I married Reddit boy over here?
Am I the jerk for telling my mother-in-law I'll pay for my wedding myself if she can't respect my few wishes? I, 25 male, will be marrying my fiancée, G, who's 25 female, later on this year. I proposed to her a little bit before Christmas, and we're aiming for a November wedding. G has 2 older brothers, only one of who has been married, and for one reason or another, my mother-in-law, who's 68, was not involved in the planning of their wedding at all. She was pretty hurt over this, and she's always wanted to help plan her kids' weddings. So when we got engaged, she offered to pay for most of the wedding, and in return, we agreed to let her help with the planning. In my mind, as long as I'm marrying G, I'm happy, so I was okay with this. The only thing I'm really sticking to that I refuse to change is what I'm wearing. My mother passed when I was very young, and she was the daughter of first-generation Scottish immigrants. My grandparents moved from the north of Scotland in the 60s, and my mother was brought up learning about her parents' culture. Since she passed, I've had a hard time connecting to that side of my family, and after my grandfather passed a few years ago, I decided that I wanted to wear her family's kilt when I got married. I talked about this with my fiancée before we got engaged because it is an unorthodox idea, but she thought it was sweet and liked the idea. A few days ago, my mother-in-law came up to me and told me I'd have to wear a traditional tuxedo instead of a kilt. When I asked her why, she said it went against the view she had of G's wedding, and that the colors of the kilt clashed with the colors she had chosen for the wedding. When I told her that this was pretty much the only thing I'm unwilling to budge on, she brought up how she's paying for most of the wedding and wearing a tux is the least I could do. When I brought this up to G, she echoed the sentiment her mother had made about paying for the wedding. I'm able to pay for it myself, and I told G that I thought she understood how important this connection to my mother was to me, especially because she can't be there, and if she wasn't able to accept that, then I'd pay for the wedding myself. G told me I was being a bit of a jerk for being this stuck to what I want to wear, and once my mother-in-law heard that I would just pay for the wedding myself, she got really upset because it's always been her dream to plan G's wedding. I'm feeling like a bit of a jerk right now and was wondering if I should just wear a standard tux. My family's kilt is really important to me, but this is causing more conflict than I thought it would. Update. I took most people's advice and I talked to my fiancée about this issue before going forward. Her siding with her mother like this and going against me was really out of character, so I felt like I really needed to figure out what was on the go. The long and short of it came down to money. G doesn't make as much of a salary as I do. I make about 2.5 times her salary. Despite this, she's pretty insistent of things being 50-50 between us. Our finances aren't combined until after marriage because of some weird tax issue and legal things in our home region. But even with me making more, she insists we're a team and have to go 50-50 on big things: rent, car payments, electrical, wedding, etc. So even though I'm able to pay for the wedding myself, she's not able to pay for the half she feels like she'd have to pay. Because of this, she's really clinging to the idea of her mother paying for our wedding, even though I'd be more than happy to pay for it myself. We talked yesterday evening, and she said that since she accepted her mother paying for the wedding, their relationship has become pretty strained, with mother-in-law pretty much taking over the wedding planning. Apparently, mother-in-law was initially pushing for a tropical destination wedding in Jamaica, an idea that G put down quickly as she knows I hate the idea of a destination wedding, and mother-in-law had even tried to get final say on the dress that G was going to wear, as well as she wanted final say over who the bridesmaids were. She wanted her friend's daughters, who G is not even close to, in the party. I've had a pretty good relationship with mother-in-law so far, so I found it kind of odd how she went total momzilla. But I have noticed her and G drifting apart a bit, although I never thought it was related. A few people thought that G actually hated the idea of the kilt and had mother-in-law acting as the bad guy to try and change my mind, and you're not completely wrong. She doesn't hate the idea, but really doesn't like that the other male members of the bridal party will be wearing tuxes, while myself and my cousin would be wearing kilts. She wanted consistency across the board and had expressed this to her mother. Mother-in-law took this as the opportunity to get me to wear tux instead of getting the groomsmen to wear kilts, and had the wedding colors changed, without G's knowledge, to contrast with my family's. When I talked to G yesterday, she said that she had just gotten out of a massive fight with her mother over changing the colors and really wasn't in the mood to start another argument with her. She acknowledged she was in the wrong for siding with her mom and seemed genuinely sorry. She said that in the stress of planning a wedding while having an overbearing mother, she had thought of the kilt as another detail and had forgotten the significance of it to me, and that she was really sorry. In the meantime, a few changes have been made. My mother-in-law is no longer paying for the wedding and no longer involved in planning. I'm going to pay half, as G never wanted me to pay more than half by myself for something that's for both of us, and my father-in-law is covering the parts that G is going to have some trouble covering. Mother-in-law is aware of this. Father-in-law and mother-in-law are still together, however, he's not telling her that he's helping to pay. We're still getting married in November, wedding colors have been changed back to match my kilt, and we've decided to rent kilts in matching colors for the other groomsmen so that they can match the aesthetic. Thankfully, no deposits were put down on things like tux rentals, bridesmaids' dresses, or decorations, so no money lost. I know a lot of people told me to seriously reconsider marrying G, and going into our talk last night, I really was. But I'm happy with how things turned out, since this really was an anomaly in her behavior, and I really am excited to marry her.
Don't stop now. We've got hours of the best stories waiting for you. Tap here and keep watching. And hey, if you love these, don't forget to subscribe.